Part 13. Nothing unusual happened in 1995. My wife and I started the beginning of the new year like we always did, at her sister's house on the South Shore, where her sister organized and hosted her annual celebration by eating and gambling. 1 month later, we celebrated the new year again, this time according to the Asian lunar calendar, doing the exact same thing, eating and gambling. According to the Lee family, the year 1995, the year of the pig, was supposed to be a lucky year filled with happiness. It is usually during the celebration of the Asian New Year that everyone in the Lee family starts reading their horoscope predictions for the year and for the rest of their life. I remember that it was about that time that an Asian astrology predicting people's future was released for the first time in English, and that the younger children, who although were able to speak Vietnamese fluently, were not that skilled at reading it, were happy that they could read about their horoscope predictions in English, although many still preferred to be able to have it done so in French, but none was available. Out of curiosity, some of the older adults, including my wife and I, read the English version as well. I remember that my wife was not happy about her predictions and consequently repudiated them. She did not like what it wrote about her. People born in 1965 were born in the year of the snake. Although snakes have no financial troubles and bring luck and money to businesses, they are very stingy with their finances and consequently are not good people to ask for a loan. Asking favors from snakes are also unwise because he or she can become overbearing as a result. At times, their strong character can cause conflicts with others. Their frankness can get them into trouble. They are oftentimes lazy, stubborn, and selfish. They are good at handling money, but should be careful not to become mean or greedy. They are very jealous and very possessive in love. They are also passionate, seductive, charming, secretive, and evasive. They never lack admirers. Even when they fall out of love, they are reluctant to end the relationship. Snakes tend to have children for the purposes of keeping their spouse tied down. Early in their life, snakes are relatively peaceful, but as they grow older, they tend to change drastically. Their romanticism, wandering eyes, and thirst for amorous entanglements can pose a threat to their security in their later years. Although they will likely achieve stability in their middle age, they will only find true happiness when they reach their 60s. This is what the same book wrote about me. People born in 1969, the year of the rooster, are open, tranquil, and loved by most people around them. They transfer their serenity and kindness to others and are universally trusted. They are extremely adaptable, make exceptional teammates, and loyal friends. They take care not to hurt the feelings of others and know how to establish harmony. They tend to hide their feelings to avoid burdening others and also like to voice their opinions. Roosters are meticulous, vigilant, efficient, orderly, extremely well organized, conscientious, honorable, trusting, and honest. They are always ready to lend a hand and are anxious to please. Once they start a job, they carry it through conscientiously and diligently. Roosters are armchair warriors and prefer to fight behind a desk. This does not mean that they are cowards. Roosters can be courageous when they need to be. Sometimes they are too naive and are easy to exploit, which often they regret. They will suffer in their middle age. Happiness will only come to them after the age of 45. Roosters tend to have long-term relationships. Roosters make their family, the raising of children, and upkeep of their home their priorities. Marriage can greatly alter their destiny, so they should be particularly careful who they marry. Time will tell if these predictions become true. In May 1995, I was notified that I was hired to work as a nurse in an Ottawa hospital and that they were expecting me to begin the following month. My mother had mixed feelings about this good news. On the one hand, she was happy that I finally found a job in a hospital as a nurse, but on the other hand, she was sad and, in fact, devastated to lose me. She had always seen me as a kind, gentle, generous, and caring man who was able to provide the kind of love that she never quite received from her father, whom she was taken away from because of some still mysterious internal disagreement between my mother's father and his mother and my mother's grandmother. Neither did my mother obtain that kind of love from my father, who, although means well in his thoughts, was never able to convey his intentions in a gentle and affectionate way. For my mother, having her beloved son move out of the city was equivalent to losing him due to a terminal disease. My mother had abandonment issues. It was the reason why, after I had gotten married, I still had to live nearby her. In fact, I was her neighbor. In some ways, I helped her adjust to the fact that I am a married adult by gradually moving away from her, which in my mind had to be done in a sequential, step-by-step approach to cutting the umbilical cord between us, until either she was ready to fully live without me, which was unlikely to happen from how she behaved from 1992 to 1994, or until it was no longer feasible to continue living near her, which was the case since my wife and I had now graduated from school and were unable to find work in Montreal in our fields. Still, my mother was overcome with sadness to see me leave because she had instilled in me not only her love, but also what she believed a man should be in today's world, as opposed to the way men behaved and acted in her parents, and her grandparents' generations. She had raised me much the same way other boys of my generation were being raised in Quebec, to become un homme rose, a pink man, the type of man who not only provides for his wife and children, but also loves them, nurtures them, and takes care of them at home. My wife had seen the effects that leaving Montreal for Ottawa had on my mother, and in many ways it had the same effect on her father. She fully realized at that point the kind of man I really was, the kind of man that her mother had always advised her and her sisters to find and marry, the kind of man their own mother married. My wife's brothers-in-law all arrived in Quebec from Vietnam early enough in their lives to adopt the pink man mentality, whereas her father had become a pink man by necessity after his parents died when he was only a teenager, forcing him to take care of his younger siblings. It was the first time since we had been together that my wife had told me that I had inherited the best qualities of my mother and the best qualities of my father, and how fortunate she was to find a nice guy like me. I had moved to Ottawa on June 24, 1995, Quebec's national holiday. My wife joined me in Ottawa at the end of July 1995. After she had completed her final exam in her computer program at Concordia University. During these 30 days apart, I would drive to Montreal from Ottawa on my days off from work to be with my wife, since she was too busy to come and stay in Ottawa. She was eager to start working as a computer programmer now that she had finally settled in Ottawa with me in late July 1995. During the previous 6 months, she had sent her resume to various organizations and companies around the Ottawa region. Even though Ottawa was booming with work for computer programmers, she was unable to obtain employment. She would get many job interviews, but nothing resulted from them. This pattern continued for about 7 or 8 months. She became sad and discouraged, even though I was working and paying all the monthly living expenses. At the time, we were living in a studio apartment, what the locals in Ottawa call a bachelor, in the heart of Westboro Village on Richmond Road, corner of Golden Avenue. In general, nothing much happened in the world in 1995 except the acquittal of O.J. Simpson for murder, the rejection of Quebec voters to separate from Canada, the election of centre-right conservative Jacques Chirac as France's president, rumors and allegations of sexual impropriety of U.S. President Bill Clinton, and the conviction of Paul Bernardo for the kidnapping, raping, and murdering of two Southern Ontario teenagers, his wife and partner in crime, Karla Homolka, made a deal with prosecutors to plead guilty to manslaughter with a 12-year prison sentence in exchange for her help to convict her husband. In January 1996, the Prime Minister of Greece, Andreas Papandreou, resigned due to illness and was replaced by Kostas Simitis, who also served as leader of the PASOK Socialist Party for 8 years. In late May 1996, the Israel electorate had, for the first time in its history, directly voted for its Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. Not only was the first Israeli Prime Minister to be born in the state of Israel, he was also the youngest. Through the use of American Republican-inspired campaign strategies, he was able to convince the Israeli electorate that he was the best candidate to keep the country safe from terrorism, particularly since the Palestinian suicide bombings took place months before the election, killing 32 Israelis. The capitalist Netanyahu was forced to enter a coalition with the two smaller but radical socialist parties to govern the country. My wife did not think much of Netanyahu. Before he had gotten elected, I did not know much about him. It was only after he won the 1996 election that I began to take notice of him. Initially, I found him intriguing and even charismatic. In the years that followed, I have come to respect Netanyahu and admire him both as a politician and a leader. Meanwhile, back in Ottawa, my wife had taken a job interview class in March 1996 to help her better succeed in obtaining employment. Success. In May 1996, she was hired to work for Canada Post at their headquarters on Heron Road, a place that I had been to on 2 separate occasions when I toured the building with my class in university. She was fired within hours of starting her first day of work. She had paged me when she arrived home, since at that time I was mostly working and providing health care services to people in their homes. I remember being surprised that she was home so early on her first day of work. When I had spoken to her on the phone, she was crying heavily, telling me that she had been fired from Canada Post. She did not tell me much of the details, except that they did not like her programming skills. She wanted me to come home immediately, but I had still not finished working my hours with my patient. I had told her that I would be home in a couple of hours, but she did not seem happy with my response. She wanted me to leave immediately. I told her that I could not because I had a duty to my patient, and also I did not want to lose my job, which was our only source of income. She did not seem to understand or care, nor did she seem to have the patience to wait a couple of hours. Impatience. When I arrived home that afternoon, I made certain to give her all my time and attention to her during this sad time for her. I encouraged her not to give up and that we will try again until she gets a job that satisfies her. That job came in July 1996. I remember because we had gone to celebrate her job offer on June 29, 1996, by attending the Eagles concert at the Ottawa Corel Centre in the western suburb of Kanata. Besides being a huge fan of the Beatles, she was also a huge fan of the Eagles, particularly singer-drummer Don Henley and singer-bassist Timothy B. Schmidt. This was not our first concert together. We had seen Phil Collins in Montreal on June 14, 1994, at the Montreal Forum downtown, but we had also seen him once before with his other band members from Genesis on May 29, 1992, at the Montreal Olympic Stadium at the east end of the city on Sherbrooke Street. An Ontario Court of Appeal decision in the early summer of 1996 transformed women's behavior and state of dress in public. The Ontario court ruled that a woman going topless in public was not a sexual or indecent act. It was a legal decision that was replicated in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and New York State. This decision by the Ontario court was prompted after an Ontario woman, Gwen Jacobs, a student at the University of Guelph, was arrested and charged for going topless in July 1991 in public. I actually had a classmate at the University of Ottawa who took several classes with Gwen Jacobs in Guelph in the early 1990s. After the court's ruling, women across Ontario, including Ottawa, were seen topless in public, on city streets, in parks, on beaches, on their front lawns, and in their backyards. I remember when my wife and I had gone to the Ottawa area beaches, either Westboro Beach, Mooney's Bay, or Britannia Beach. We did not think much about women sunbathing topless, since we had seen women do this in other countries, such as those in the Caribbean islands and in Europe. What we found crude and in poor taste were the women, who were not protesting, walking or standing topless on city streets. We both agreed that being topless in public is not a crime, even though American and Canadian societies have gone to great lengths to sexualize and criminalize female breasts. But a woman should still use some common sense when and where to take off their tops, not for the sake of criminality, but for the sake of elegance. A 2005 study conducted on the topic confirmed that most Canadians, 52%, approve of women going topless at the beach, while 48% approve of being topless at the park. Conversely, 72% of Canadians disapprove of women being topless on city streets. On a more personal level, we received good news in the summer of 1996. My wife's first cousin, her father's nephew, invited us to his wedding in Montreal. The reception was held inside a restaurant in one of the hotels in Chinatown. Approximately 200 guests attended. Aside from being a festive occasion, it was only a very educational one as well. I had learned from my drunken brother-in-law, my wife's oldest brother, who was the same Asian astrological sign as her, but 12 years older, that he still harbored angry feelings towards his father for having been overly strict with him when he was a child and adolescent. He did not like being disciplined or punished by his father for every mistake that he had made. He was also angry at his mother for never liking or fully accepting his wife, even though she gave birth to 2 sons and stayed married to him despite his infidelity with a prison worker while he was enrolled in the re-education camp in Vietnam. He was rambling on in his drunken stupor that since he was the oldest son, he should have received the parents' inheritance money instead of to the middle son, who was allotted the life savings of Mr. and Mrs. Lee, even though they were still alive, and that the only reason why he did not inherit their money was because his mother never approved of him marrying his wife. Interesting. I also had a very stimulating conversation with another family member who may or may not have been drunk. He had told me that even though the people of Quebec rejected separating from Canada, the federal government should not assume that it can tell the people of Quebec what to do in the Federation. If the people of Quebec decide to separate from Canada, there is nothing that Ottawa can do to stop them from doing it. I just looked at him and nodded my head and told him, yes, of course. Apparently, this guy never got the memo which says, never discuss religion or politics at family reunions, especially when too much alcohol has been consumed. After the wedding, we stayed overnight at Mr. and Mrs. Lee's home, where we would see and hear them argue over the silliest things, like the wetness or dryness of the rice that Mr. Lee cooked. Mrs. Lee would always argue that the rice that he cooked was too wet, while Mr. Lee would argue that the rice that she made was too dry. They would quarrel and bicker for an hour about the rice. What a waste of time. Of all the things to argue about, couldn't they find a more important issue to resolve? Furthermore, Mrs. Lee would engage in passive-aggressive retaliatory behavior. For example, she would intentionally and immediately spit onto the kitchen floor after her husband had just finished mopping it. What an unusual married couple. Blissfulness. When I had commented to my wife about her parents bickering, she replied that that was nothing compared to the way they used to argue when her parents, and in particular her mother, were younger. She used to hit her father and beat him up when they fought, usually over the control of the family's money. Back when they were all still living in Vietnam, she never saw her father hit her mother back. Leanne said that she found it cool seeing a woman beat up a man for a change. My own parents had their contentious moments where it was my father rather than my mother who was nasty and callous. When my mother would ask him why he acted that way, he would always reply, "Because I am a Greek man." My mother would then reply, "So, if you are a Greek man, does that mean you have to be an asshole?" My father would never answer that question. He did not have to, because the way that he smiled already answered my mother's question. Yes. Anyway, throughout the summer of 1996, my wife was very happy and satisfied working at the small computer company which had hired her. It was located on Robertson Road, about 9 kilometers or 5.5 miles west of our home, in the heart of Bell's Corners. In spite of her father's request to not let her drive the car after she had gotten into an accident driving her parents to a family gathering in Montreal, while I stayed in Ottawa to take a university exam, I let her drive to work anyway, while I took the bus to either school or work. Besides, it was an easy, straightforward drive, since Richmond Road became Robertson Road, and her job offered free parking. Practical. My wife had admitted that the workload was heavy and difficult, and that in order to catch up with project deadlines, she had to work on Saturdays. But she was happy because she loved the job and she loved the high salary. For reasons that are still not completely clear to me, she was fired in early October 1996. I remember the date because she had just celebrated her 31st birthday and because the month before we had gone to the downtown clinic near Bank Street so she could get another abortion. When she had informed me that she was pregnant in August 1996, she was very sad. She did not feel that it was the right time to have children, especially since she had finally started working after 1 year of graduating from university. She also felt that her employers would not be very understanding or accommodating about her pregnancy, since it was a small company competing for business with the larger corporations. She had firmly made her decision to have the abortion on Friday, September 13, 1996. 3 weeks later, she was fired. Depression. It was a sad and depressing time for us. My wife did not feel good about herself because she did not feel she could achieve success in her career. I had learned during this time that she never truly liked computer programming. She admitted that she did not have a natural talent for it, but she loved the salary that employers were offering for such skills. She never told what she really wanted to be, and that every profession that she thought of becoming in her younger years was either inspired by salary or prestige. It would be another 13 months before she finally got a 2-year contract with the federal government across the Ottawa River in Quebec in the federal building complex called Place du Portage. During those 13 months of waiting for work, she mostly stayed home and did as she pleased, while I worked and studied. We could not do much in terms of living lavishly, due to my busy work and school schedules, and because we had to manage and spend my income wisely on the rent, food, transportation, cable television, the telephone, and health services which are not covered by the Ontario government, such as birth control pills, which my wife started taking, and my acupuncture sessions, which I needed to take in the summer and autumn of 1997 after I had injured my back due to work, an expense that my wife was not very happy about. Nevertheless, between October 1996 and November 1997, I made every effort to drive to Montreal to visit both of our families on the days that I did not have any work or classes. Going to Montreal was the closest to a vacation that we could afford in terms of time and money. Even when there weren't any family gatherings planned, we would still go to Montreal so that my wife could visit her father, whom she often missed, and watch movies together. I remember that they had both enjoyed watching Steven Spielberg's 1993 movie Schindler's List, a movie about a German businessman who saved the lives of 1,000 Jews during the Holocaust by hiring them in his factories. My wife cried at the end of the movie because she said that the German businessman reminded her of her father. My wife always became anxious during our travel to and from Montreal. She was restless whenever we drove over bridges. She was never formally diagnosed with gephyrophobia, and equally so when we drove past trucks along the Trans-Canada Highway, whether on the 417, referred to by locals in Ottawa as the Queen's Way, on the 40, referred to by locals in Montreal as the Metropolitan, or anywhere in between. Her fears did not go away, not even when we were on vacation. When we were on the Greek island of Syros in 2007, we had to return the rental car the next day because she got extremely anxious when I drove on the island's main road, which runs along the edge of a cliff, because she felt that the car would slide off of the road and crash into the ocean below. She felt safer when we walked and took very short taxi rides. In the 7 years that I had gotten to know her, I also learned that she was afraid of the dark, nyctophobia, afraid of being alone in large open spaces, agoraphobia, and afraid of drowning, aquaphobia. She also loathed surprises, kenotophobia. I began to see a pattern and a common theme with my wife. She had an overall fear of not being in control of the people or environments around her. She also had a fear of ghosts, phasmophobia. But this has more to do with an incident that happened to her about a couple of months after we had married. She claimed that she saw the ghost of her sister, the one who had died at the age of 7 in 1965, in the middle of the night while we were sleeping in our bedroom. She has been spooked ever since 1992. Another spooky incident that happened in 1997 on July 1st was the return of Hong Kong to China after more than 150 years of British control. For many people of Chinese heritage, including my mother-in-law, this transfer back to China brought mixed feelings, fears, and deep concerns over the likely loss of freedom and democracy, but also some happiness that people of Hong Kong would no longer be governed by Westerners. The terms and conditions of the transfer were finally agreed to in 1983 to 1984 after several negotiations between British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and Chinese Premier Zhao Ziyang. I personally was saddened to see Hong Kong transferred to China because I did not feel confident that China would continue to grant the residents of Hong Kong true, full freedom and democracy. I had mostly agreed with Thatcher's policies and governing decisions, for example, lowering direct taxes on income and increasing indirect taxes, reducing the power of the trade unions, the privatization of nationalized industries, supporting climate protection policies, and overall smaller government and deregulation strategies. But the signing of the Sino-British Joint Declaration in Beijing in 1984? I don't know. Unconvinced. Nevertheless, I have the utmost respect for Margaret Thatcher, mostly because she has proven that a woman can be strong, be a leader, and be a conservative without depreciating or ignoring the rights of men. Veneration. Another significant event occurred in 1997. On September 5, the sad news of Mother Teresa's death circled the globe. Although I was not Catholic, I was saddened by the loss of this strong, dedicated, compassionate, and generous Albanian Indian woman who not only was known for her charity for eradicating poverty, but was known for being awarded the 1979 Nobel Peace Prize. Despite all the good that she has done, she was still heavily criticized for her stance against contraception and abortion, for accepted donations from disreputable sources like the autocratic and corrupt Duvalier family in Haiti, which she visited in early 1981, and her views on suffering. Controversies. Unfortunately, Mother Teresa's death was overshadowed by the death of Princess Diana from a car accident in Paris, which occurred several days earlier on August 31, 1997. The accident was blamed on the paparazzi who were chasing Princess Diana on their motorcycles in a tunnel by Seine. Her boyfriend, Imad Eldin Mohammed Abdel Monim Faid, the son of Egyptian billionaire, was driving their car and had also died in the crash. Their deaths were tragically disturbing, and the response to their death by the paparazzi was equally disturbing, particularly when many argued that the paparazzi themselves caused the accident. Disconcerting. My wife, who was a fan of royal lineage, was particularly upset by circumstances of these events. Anyway, my wife was offered an entry-level junior computer programming position in November 1997 by the Department of Public Works and Government Services. According to my wife, it was not very interesting or challenging, but at least she was getting a decent annual salary of around $35,000, which was guaranteed for 2 years, plus the opportunity to apply for other federal government employment positions, which were easier to apply to since she was already working for the federal government. Even though she was employed and well paid, I continued to work part-time while studying. With our combined income, we were able to move into a larger apartment, 1.8 kilometers or 1 mile west, but still on Richmond Road and still in Westboro. My wife and I had developed a tradition where I would drive across the Chaudière Bridge into Gatineau, since the Portage Bridge was always crowded due to traffic, to meet her in front of her office building after work on Fridays so that we could go eat in Chinatown, or Saigon Town, as some people call it, which stretches from Bay Street in the east to Rochester Street in the west along Somerset Street. Her office was near Chinatown, about 3 kilometers or 2 miles away. After eating in a Chinese or Vietnamese restaurant, we would enter one of the Asian grocery stores to buy ingredients that my wife needed to cook one of her half-dozen favorite dishes on the weekend. She often had a habit of putting too much hot chili sauce in the food that she cooked because she loved her food extra hot and spicy, making it difficult for me and later our children to eat. After she got her job at the Department of National Defense, we had modified our eating out tradition by going to Chinatown on Saturday mornings if we did not have to go to Montreal. Sometimes in the summer, we would cross the Ottawa River into Quebec to take walks and enjoy the beautiful natural scenery in Gatineau Park, the National Conservation Park located 30 kilometers or 18.5 miles northeast from our home. In mid-August, we would go to the Ottawa Creek Festival at the church on Prince of Wales Drive, about 8 kilometers or 5 miles southeast from our home. In addition to having 2 incomes, hers was larger than mine, I was now able to reduce my working hours to attend church services on Sundays at the Dormition of the Virgin Mary Greek Orthodox Church, particularly on important times of the year like Orthodox Easter. The Dormition of the Virgin Mary Greek Orthodox Church is the only Greek Orthodox church in the Ottawa area. It serves parishioners residing in the Ottawa Valley and West Quebec. The church is the heart and soul of the Greek community in Ottawa. The first Greek to have arrived in Ottawa may have been Gregorius Kanellakos from Sparta in around 1895. Although the Greek community only began to take shape on February 25, 1929, when a group of Greeks living in Ottawa founded the Hellenic community of Ottawa. The Greek language school and Sunday school were only established in 1943, the same year that the community was incorporated in the province of Ontario. The 1960s saw a big influx of new families in the Ottawa area, and as a result, the activities of the community increased, including the relocation of the mid-sized church from its downtown location on Albert Street to its current largest site on Prince of Wales Drive in the 1970s. The 1990s began with the official opening of the newly expanded community center and banquet hall adjacent to the Greek Orthodox Church. On May 16, 1992, Reverend Father Alexander Michaelopoulos was appointed the 7th priest of the community parish. Father Alex Michalopoulos, was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina, on December 6, 1958, to Father Michael and Presbytera Magdalena Michalopoulos, both of Greek descent. He was raised in a devoted Greek Orthodox household, assisting his father and other clergy at church services, and was very involved in the life of the church. As a young adult, Father Alex entered the business field and began his post-secondary education in international affairs at the University of Buenos Aires. He continued his education in the United States, earning a Bachelor of Arts degree in Business Management from Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan. He worked in the retail and fashion industry as a manager and buyer, but soon heard his calling from God and enrolled at Hellenic College, Holy Cross Orthodox School of Theology in Brookline, Massachusetts, where he earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in Philosophy and Religion in 1985 and a Master of Divinity degree with honors in 1987. He met his future wife, Maria Hallis, at an Orthodox youth conference during his studies at Holy Cross and were married in 1987. Father Alex was ordained as a deacon in Detroit in September 1987, then again as a priest in April 1988. He has served in Cincinnati, Ohio from 1987 to 1990 and in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma from 1990 to 1992. Their two eldest daughters, Alexia and Nicoletta, were born in the United States. Their youngest daughter, Michaela, was born in Ottawa shortly after they arrived there in May 1992. In the decade that followed, more families of Greek descent moved to Ottawa from other Canadian cities, and the second generation of the Greek Canadians started their own families, boosting membership to the church and community. On January 4, 2004, the church closed for major renovations to the main entrance, the installation of a new exit on the south side of the church, the replacement of the interior of the roof, the installation of a new lighting and sound system, the refurbishing of the pews, the installation of granite in the narthex and altar of the church, and the installation of new carpeting. During the renovations, the church services were taking place at the community banquet hall. The first divine liturgy in the renovated church took place on Palm Sunday, April 4, 2004. It was only in 2004 when I truly started to attend church services every Sunday. But as of 1998, I only attended church services whenever I could. Part 14. The start of 1998 was a challenging one with the entire Ottawa region and all of Quebec hit by the infamous ice storm from January 4 until January 10. My wife and I were fortunate that, unlike the rest of the region and Quebec, we did not lose any electricity. In the summer of 1998, my wife and I had gone on real vacation for the first time since 1993. We had decided to go to the island of St. Martin for a week in August to celebrate the successes of our hard work and sacrifices the past 5 years, but also to take a break from the stresses of our everyday lives. In many ways, it was like a second honeymoon at a tropical paradise where the daytime temperature was about 35 degrees Celsius or 95 degrees Fahrenheit. We had enjoyed our day trip to St. Martin in 1993 and had always made plans to return someday for at least a week. It took us 5 years, but better late than never. It was an enjoyable time, even though we ran into some trouble with the local police who had stopped us because my wife was caught driving our rented moped without her helmet, which was against the law, but she did it anyway because she hated wearing them. I was able to convince the police officers to not issue her a ticket by giving her my helmet to wear before walking back about 2.5 kilometers or 1.5 miles to our hotel to get hers. The island of St. Martin is governed by 2 European nations, the Netherlands in the southern third of the island and France in the northern 2/3 of the island. In 1648, after the Spanish forces abandoned the island of St. Martin because it was no longer profitable to them, the Dutch and the French moved in to establish their settlements. To avoid going into war, both countries signed the Treaty of Concordia in 1648, which divided the island in two. There is a famous folklore about how the border division was determined. In 1648, two walkers were chosen, one to represent the French community and one to represent the Dutch, and placed on both extremes of the island. Each person was to walk along the shoreline. They were not allowed to run until they met the other walker. The point where they met became the border which divided the two countries. The French walker had walked more than his Dutch counterpart. The island became a tourist destination since the 1950s for the Dutch side and the 1970s for the French side. The Dutch side is known for its nightclubs, jewelry stores, duty-free liquor stores, casinos, and beaches, while the French side is known for its fine cuisine, nude beaches, outdoor markets, and fashionable clothing shops. My wife and I stayed on the French side, but took the hotel shuttle at night to the casinos on the Dutch side. Although we had a great time that August week in 1998, I felt that something was off about my wife, but I could not pinpoint what it was. I felt the same way Spider-Man did when his spider sense was tingling to warn him of danger. The problem with my spider sense, or hunch, was that I did not have sufficient proof or reason, supported by evidence, to confirm or refute these feelings. Intuition. These feelings of intuition proved to be valid when a few weeks later I had received an unusual phone call from Montreal in the middle of the day when I was home and my wife was at work. Ali Khan Nathu's older brother Karim was phoning because he was looking for Ali, whom he said owed him money, but suddenly disappeared from the city without reimbursing him. When I asked him why he was calling me, he replied that Ali was always calling this number, which appeared on his phone bill for the past 2 years. He told me that if I saw or spoke to him to pass the message that he wanted to be reimbursed for the money that he borrowed. When I had told my wife that her former classmate's brother had called me that day, she acted surprised and replied that she had not spoken to Ali Khan in a very long time and that she believes that he is still living in Montreal. She denied knowing anything about Ali Khan's whereabouts, so I gave her the benefit of the doubt. This was also about the time when U.S. President Bill Clinton denied having sexual relations with that woman, but admitted before a grand jury that he had an inappropriate relationship with her, that is, his former intern Monica Lewinsky, a relationship that he apologized to American residents on national television. My wife felt that no apology was needed by President Clinton and that he did not owe any explanation to American residents or the courts, nor, if he did not want to, owe an explanation to his own wife. In my wife's mind, President Clinton did not commit a crime and thus should not have been treated by his political opponents as a criminal. She had never agreed to Clinton's impeachment by the House of Representatives on the charges of perjury and obstruction of justice on December 19, 1998. The rest of 1998, up to and including 1999, was spent the same way my wife and I always spent our time, working and studying. I was studying as a full-time graduate at the University of Ottawa, with the full endorsement of my wife, who had just won a permanent job position at a higher level in the Department of National Defense as a computer programmer. It was a position she came in second place for, but after successfully contesting the results of the competition on the basis of suspected bias against her because of her ethnicity and sex, had the decision overturned and came in first to win her position. She told me that her new supervisors were not happy about being forced to hire her, and in the years that followed, the reason for their unhappiness would be justified, but due to the protection by the union, it would be nearly impossible to discipline her or dismiss her. The only action that her supervisors could use against her without violating her union-protected rights was to deny her a promotion within the department. What my wife did not realize was that although she was guaranteed immunity from being fired by her union, a concept that she treasured, her behavior towards her supervisors and co-workers would impede her from getting promoted for 10 years. At the time she won her job position in 1998, she did not think or see that far ahead. Leanne loved the concept of diplomatic immunity. Whenever she saw that the car ahead of us on the street had diplomatic license plate, she would salivate with envy. The sheer thought of diplomatic immunity excited her and turned her on. Orgasm. For the time being, she was happy and proud about her promotion, as was I, and she began to show it. In some ways, my wife reminded me of former First Lady, that is, the wife of the 10th President of the Philippines, Imelda Marcos, who between 1965 and 1986 was called the Iron or Steel Butterfly for persisting and for confronting resistance and challenges. Of course, the widow of former President Ferdinand Marcos's everlasting legacy shall forever be her collection of 3,000 pairs of shoes, which has since been put on display at the National Museum of the Philippines. My wife and I had made plans to drive to New York City on December 30, 1998, to celebrate New Year's Eve with my cousins. But those plans had to be canceled at the last minute due to predictions of a massive snowstorm that was going to hit all of the Midwestern and Northeastern United States, especially Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York, and New Jersey, and the central Canadian provinces of Ontario and Quebec. I remember that on January 2, 1999, the cities of Chicago and Toronto were hit the worst by the storm and were literally shut down. Chicago got dumped with 55 centimeters, or 21.6 inches of snow, while Toronto got dumped with 40 centimeters, or 16 inches of snow. Ottawa was not spared and received 27 centimeters, or 10.6 inches of snow. For the next 10 days, the snow continued dumping a total of 118 centimeters, or 46 inches of snow on Toronto. This prompted Mayor Mel Lastman to call in the Canadian Forces to help remove the snow since the city was brought to a standstill. As a result, Mayor Lastman and the City of Toronto became the butt of jokes in the media. To show his appreciation for their help, Mayor Lastman gave each soldier a free ticket to a Toronto Maple Leafs hockey game, which were provided to the mayor as complimentary gifts on behalf of the Maple Leafs managers in an interview that Mel Lastman gave to the Toronto Star newspaper in 2009. Lastman stated that he was proud to have called in the Army to shovel the snow during the blizzard of 1999. Shameless. About a month after the January 1999 blizzard, Hugo Chavez was inaugurated the new president of Venezuela after having won the national election months before in 1998. Chavez's victory opened the door and inspired voters across Latin America to elect leftist presidents in years that followed: Uruguay, Bolivia, and Nicaragua. Chavez was able to strengthen the Venezuelan economy and alleviate some of the poverty by nationalizing its petroleum industry and by developing and increasing its social welfare programs in 2000. He became a man of the people with his radio shows, television shows, and personal newspaper. With support from voters, he reformed the country's constitution, which increased the rights and protection of women and the indigenous population and guaranteed public education, housing, health care, food for all, and protection of the environment, but then scraped the country's Supreme Court and weakened democracy by increasing presidential terms from 5 years to 6. Chavez succeeded in getting reelected by catering to the poorer classes in Venezuela. Over time, his policies and governing style became further radicalized throughout his communist ideology, which were derived from the former Soviet Union and from China. He got elected for a third term in 2006 and amended the Constitution so that he can govern the country indefinitely, but died from cancer in March 2013 before he could. Then merged all of the leftist parties into one larger one, the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, to continue the promotion and expansion of his Bolivarian revolution. He supplied cheap Venezuelan oil to Cuba, Central and South America, and Europe to strengthen his economic, political, and military alliances. His government and policies were later proven to be corrupt. Military and financial support to Colombian guerrillas involved in the drug trade, widespread corruption in Venezuela's police force, discrimination against those who were ideologically against his leftist policies, removing journalistic freedom of expression, workers' freedom of association, and the right to promote human rights, and anti-Semitism as evident on Chávez's agreement with Iran to oppose Zionism and his 2006 Christmas speech, which the minority Jewish population in Venezuela took offense to. He also offended Christians on several occasions, but also believed that his socialist policies were derived from Jesus Christ, whom he stated was a communist. Chávez was against laissez-faire market-based capitalism and American imperialism and had even called U.S. President the devil during his 2006 speech at the United Nations. Chávez was a womanizer who carried out a 9-year extramarital affair before he finally divorced his first wife. I could not relate to Chávez because I did not like or agree with his policies and approach to governing. I much preferred the policies of Felipe Calderón, who was president of Mexico from 2006 to 2012, but my wife loved Chávez over Calderón because she felt that Calderón was kissing the ass of U.S. President George W. Bush too much. The following 8 months of 1999 was essentially the continuation and repetition of activities from the previous year. Generally speaking, it was business as usual with school and work. My wife and I did not have much time to travel other than to visit family for a couple of days at a time sporadically throughout the year. Besides going to Montreal, we had gone to New York City for a weekend in August to attend my cousin's wedding. Cousin Christos was marrying his fiancée, Zofie, an American of Polish descent. It was the first time that many of my cousins from Greece had met my wife, since many of them were unable to attend our wedding in 1992, nor were we able to go to Greece since then. My wife noted that my cousin Margie's husband, her second one, Nick, resembled the handsome and charismatic rapist and serial killer Paul Bernardo, who was recently convicted in an Ontario court. Anyway, it would have been nice if we had stayed in New York longer, but our busy work and class schedules required us to return to Ottawa the day after Christos and Zofie's wedding. It was around this time that Ontario Premier Mike Harris called an election and was asking the electorate for a second mandate to govern the province and continue his common-sense revolution. It was my and my wife's first time voting for a provincial election in Ontario. Harris and his Progressive Conservative Party campaigned to deliver large tax cuts and significantly reduce the deficit by severely cutting spending. Their campaign was strengthened by American experts from the United States Republican Party, which convinced voters through attack ads that Ontario Liberal leader Dalton McGuinty was inexperienced and lacked vision. The Ontario New Democratic Party, the NDP, led by Howard Hampton, spent much of the campaign battling the memory of Bob Rae's unpopular government in the early 1990s and lost supporters who voted for the Liberals, who were hoping to defeat Harris via strategic voting, which in the end did not work. Ultimately, Harris and the Progressive Conservatives of Ontario won the election with 82 seats out of 103 seats and 45.1% of the popular vote because the province was performing very well economically. From the time that Premier Harris called the 1999 Ontario election, I never had doubts about his leadership or government policies. I personally wanted to see his common-sense revolution continue for another 4 years and possibly more, and was unwavering with my decision to vote for his party. My wife, on the other hand, was wavering about who to vote for because of the competing interests that she was struggling with in her mind. On the one side, she wanted a solid foundation of social collectivism established from comprehensive publicly funded programs and services. But on the other side, she did not want to pay any taxes for them, nor did she feel that people in the upper classes should contribute in paying for such programs and services. She felt that the larger-sized middle class should pay all the taxes to fund these social programs and services. She supported the Harris conservatives' fiscal policy of tax reductions, but she also supported the Liberals and NDP's policies of comprehensive social programs. It was clear to me that my wife was a high Tory, and more specifically a pink Tory, given her more liberal views regarding individual lifestyle choices and rights in society. Her insistence that there be some form of social hierarchy in Canadian society further validated my conclusion about her socio-political views. In the end, she chose low taxes for higher income earners and corporations over comprehensive social programs, which would particularly benefit lower income groups, and voted for Mike Harris and the Progressive Conservatives in the 1999 Ontario election. Anticipated. Leanne always had based her final decisions on the bottom line. Even though my wife was a huge fan of American financial advisor Susie Orman, whose motto is people first, then money, then things, she did not apply Orman's philosophy in her own decision-making, whether as a citizen, a public servant, a wife, or a mother. Part 15. In August 1999, my wife announced that her home pregnancy test was positive and that she was going to be a mother. Startling. I was unprepared for the sudden pregnancy, and in fact, even her family doctor, Dr. Alsoon Brine, who practiced medicine from her home on Blackfriars Road near Collingwood Shopping Mall, was surprised that she had gotten pregnant so quickly after having only stopped taking her birth control pills the previous month. My wife and I had discussed having children in the summer of 1999, and I had expressed my feelings that it would be best to start having them after I graduated from the University of Ottawa in early December 2000. She agreed, but decided that she needed to stop taking her birth control pills immediately to get the pills she took over the past few years out of her system. Not only that, but she also insisted that we have sexual relations on her most fertile days of the month. She referred to these days as sexual intimacy as business. I was happy about the pregnancy, but at the same time I felt anxious and stressed. Nevertheless, I fulfilled my duties as a father and husband and accompanied her to all her appointments with the obstetrician that my colleagues had recommended, as well as her ultrasound appointments. I helped her and supported her throughout her pregnancy and encouraged her to take her prenatal vitamins, eat appropriately. I made and packed her lunch for work, exercised regularly. We went swimming in the indoor pool of our apartment, and practiced Lamaze childbirth exercises at home through the use of books and videos, since we could not find a class that fitted our work and school schedule. I remember that my wife was very nervous when the ultrasound was being done to determine the baby's sex. Leanne wanted a boy to please her mother, who pressured her to get pregnant with a boy before I even graduated from university, for fear that I would leave her like Mrs. Lee's father did once I had completed my studies. But she knew that I would be very pleased and happy to have a daughter. When the ultrasound technician confirmed that we were indeed having a little girl, Leanne faced me and said, "There is your little girl. Happy?" I would have been happy either way, because it was our first child and my parents' first grandchild. The baby's health was more important to me than the gender. Mrs. Lee was not as happy. She would have been more comfortable if the baby had been a boy, despite having been assured that I was happy having a daughter. Mr. Lee was happier, but concerned that his petite daughter would not be able to handle the childbirth easily and safely. Actually, most of my sisters-in-law did not believe that she was able to get or stay pregnant. They were unaware of her previous abortions. Mr. Lee's concerns about my wife were justified. Even her obstetrician, Dr. George Tawagi, considered her pregnancy to be a high-risk one given her size and older age. We did not take any chances during her pregnancy and curtailed our travels to Montreal for family gatherings, even at Christmas time. Our decision to celebrate New Year's Eve across the Ottawa River at the casino was literally a last-minute decision. After we had seen that the fearful and catastrophic propaganda predicting the end of the world because of the millennium bug, that is, computers would not be able to distinguish the difference between the year 1900 and the year 2000, were unfounded after having seen on the television news that nothing remotely close to a disaster took place in New Zealand, Australia, Japan, Hong Kong, Europe, and the United Kingdom, which welcomed 2000 hours before we did. I remember that December 31, 1999 was an extremely cold night, minus 12 degrees Celsius or 10.5 degrees Fahrenheit, but felt much colder due to the wind chill because we had gone to the outdoor show in front of the casino to welcome the new year. Frostbite. After a grueling 2000 winter, spring came, and so did our daughter. We had decided to name her after my mother, but slightly modified. The official Vietnamese middle names of Tai Ly were also given at the request of my middle sister-in-law. Dr. Tawagi predicted that our daughter would be due on Friday, April 7, the last day my wife chose to work before starting her maternity leave of absence. But our daughter decided to wait until the blowing snow started diminishing on the morning of Monday, April 10. Both my younger brother and I were born during heavy snowstorms, which did not make it easy for my mother to travel 8.5 kilometers or 5.2 miles to the Catherine Booth Hospital on the west side of Montreal to give birth to us. The travel distance for my wife and I to the Civic Hospital on Carling Avenue was 6 kilometers or 3.7 miles southwest of home. I remember we had stayed home that weekend, and that I was only sleeping about 4 hours each night, hurrying to try and finish my last term paper on ethics before our daughter was born. I did not succeed. On the early morning hours of April 10, my wife had gone into labor. Panic. I instantly sent an email to my ethics professor and notified him that my wife was going into labor and that I would have to submit my term paper later that week. I also notified my statistics professor about the news and that I would have to take my final exam sometime the following week. We then drove to the hospital. My wife had initially tried to deliver our child vaginally since our daughter was trying to come out on her own. No progress was being made despite our daughter's efforts. It became apparent that her umbilical cord suddenly found its way around her neck and was holding her back. The doctor, one of whom was a woman named Dimitra Vasilou, a Greek-Canadian, decided to proceed with a cesarean birth. I stood beside Leanne throughout the procedure as we waited to see our daughter arrive in the world at 10:30 p.m. Our daughter weighed 3.6 kilograms, or about 8 pounds. My mother's relatives were amazed at how a tiny woman can make a big baby like that. Our daughter's birth reminded me of how my mother told me how I was born, vaginally with the assistance of forceps and vacuum extractor. The forceps did some damage to my left leg, which has never fully healed. Anyway, I had seen and held our daughter before Leanne did and noticed how much she looked like my mother. When Leanne saw her afterwards, she insisted that our daughter looked like her father. 1 month later, her family broke the sad news to her and told her that our daughter indeed looked like my mother. Thankfully, there were not any complications, and both my mother and child were doing well. My wife insisted that I go home and finish my term paper and come back the following day. Before I returned to the hospital the following day, I had called my parents and my sister-in-law to inform them about the birth and delivery of our daughter and that both mother and daughter were doing well. I remember that I also sent an email to my sister-in-law in California and my sister-in-law in Vietnam as well. By Friday, April 14, both had been discharged home. My father jumped into his car and had rushed over to Ottawa so that he would be the first person in the family to see his first grandchild. My mother and brother were very angry that he rushed to see our daughter first without them. Even though my father and my wife got along very well, they both loved the same soccer player, Diego Maradona, from Argentina, he did not stay long and had actually left later that same day. He never liked Ottawa, but then again, nobody in my family did. My father was ecstatic that he had become a grandfather and had even submitted a photo of him holding our daughter to several newspapers. It was obvious that he loved our daughter and that he wanted more grandchildren, and consequently pressured my brother to get married already and start making children. At the time, my brother was courting a French pure-wool young lady in her early 20s from the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean region, the heartland of Quebec separatism. When his godmother discovered this, she looked at my brother with disappointment in her eyes and asked him, "Why, Peter, why?" Rhetorical. His godmother, or Nona, already knew the answer to her question. It was the same reason why other Greek men or Arab men or Persian men, black men or Vietnamese men court French women from Quebec. She just wanted my brother to admit verbally to her. My brother and mother came to Ottawa the following week to see our daughter. The week after that, the entire Lee family hopped into a large minivan to accompany Mr. and Mrs. Lee to see their daughter and their 17th grandchild for the day. An 18th grandchild would follow 10 months later. Too late to be considered a dragon, like our daughter, which many in the Lee family considered to be the luckiest astrological sign. It was during their visit on this day that the Lee family was happy that I insisted that Leanne speak to our daughter in Vietnamese, since she had a habit of speaking to our daughter in English. I borrowed the language policy of Governor Guy Carleton in 1774 to establish family rules that my wife's native language be preserved and transferred onto the next generation, much in the way that it was done with the Quebec Act. I foresaw a family where the languages and valued cultural practices from both sides of the family were incorporated into our lives. Accommodation. For our daughter's mother, this meant having her speak Vietnamese and get accustomed to eating Vietnamese foods. She did not value Vietnamese songs or clothing as much. For me, the important elements of my culture were the Greek language, Greek Orthodox Christian religion, Greek singing and dancing, and being able to eat Greek food. Interestingly enough, both the Asian and Greek cultures share common rituals surrounding children, the first one being the child's 1-month anniversary. In the Asian tradition, prayers are made on the 30th day after the baby's birth at the official family gathering and celebration of the 1-month anniversary. In the Orthodox religion, the parents and the child must come to the church on the 40th day or the Sunday closest to the 40th day to receive the 40-day blessing of the child by the priest. With our daughter, both traditions were maintained, the former in Montreal and the latter in Ottawa. Since our daughter had received both blessings, we felt free to take her outside the home to the Ottawa Tulip Festival across Dow's Lake in late May 2000. The following months were spent preparing for our daughter's baptism in October 2000. On October 8, 2000, the day before Canadian Thanksgiving Day and American Columbus Day, our daughter was baptized at the Archangels Michael and Gabriel Greek Orthodox Church in Montreal by Father Stephen Smith, the same priest who married us 97 months earlier. Father Stephen was surprised that our daughter, unlike other babies, did not cry at all as she was being submerged into the basin, which looks like a giant wine glass made of gold, filled with holy water. Father Stephen had asked us if she loves baths. "Baths?" I replied. "You are looking at the next Olympic swimmer." I told him we had taken our daughter swimming at least twice a week since she was 3 months old. She loved the water. Why would our daughter cry at her baptism? My mother had told me that I did not cry either at my baptism way back in 1970. Our daughter did not even cry after she was anointed with the olive oil, blessed by the priest and applied all over her body by her godparents, or after the priest had cut 3 locks of her hair, which is the reason why Greeks traditionally do not allow the child's hair to be cut before his or her baptism. The priest must be the first to cut the child's hair. In the case of my wife, there was a huge dispute between my father, who was the godfather of my then-fiancé, and Father Stephen regarding whether she was going to be submerged naked into the holy water, the way babies are baptized in the Orthodox Christian tradition, or whether it was sufficient for her to simply have the holy water poured over her head, fully clothed. My father wanted to stick with tradition, but Father Stephen prevailed and had her keep her clothes on. She was baptized and given the name Athena Lien, Athena after the mythical Greek goddess of wisdom and military victory, and Lien out of respect to her parents who named her at birth. I have seen adult baptisms in the Orthodox Church done another way, where the woman wore clothing while being submerged into the holy water. Traditionally, my brother, who was the best man at my wedding, was supposed to have been our daughter's godfather, but Lien did not feel that my brother had developed the maturity, and thus the responsibility, to fulfill his duties as a godparent. My mother thought otherwise, and consequently I was caught in the middle of the 2 women that I loved, but were in conflict with each other. This would not be the first and only time. After consulting my father for his opinion, he simply said that on occasion we must break with tradition for the sake of peace. With those words, I had gone and introduced my good friend from Carleton University, Nick, to my wife, who, although concerned a little bit by his young age, still gave her approval for him to be our daughter's godfather. My mother was upset by our decision, but ultimately accepted it and had even grown to like Nick and his fiancée, Gabriella. I had chosen October 8, 2000 as the date of our daughter's baptism, mainly for 2 reasons. First, it was the closest weekend to our daughter's 6-month anniversary, which is about the time most children on average get baptized in the Greek Orthodox religion, and second, I knew that Gabriella did not typically work on Sundays. I was saddened when she told us that she had to go to work at the last minute. Since Gabriella was not baptized Orthodox, she was baptized Catholic, she would only have been able to be an honorary godmother instead of a full-fledged godparent, and thus excluded from applying the anointed olive oil on our daughter and signing her baptismal certificate. The role of godmother ultimately went to Nick's mother, who flew in from Winnipeg with Nick's father for the baptism. It was a good thing that she came to the baptism, because Nick was extremely nervous and had developed stage fright at the beginning of the ceremony, which did not sit well with Father Stephen. Together, Nick and his mother, Vula, managed to get the job done in getting our daughter baptized. Only Nick signed the baptismal certificate, since in the Greek Orthodox tradition only one godparent needs to sign. The reception was held at my wife's favorite Greek restaurant on Duluth Street, La Maison Grecque, the Greek House. Our guests were happy with the food, which is consistently delicious, and my father, as always, stole the show with his Tejamikos dance moves. Tejamikos involves dancing in a circle while holding hands. It was first danced by the revolutionary warriors who fought against the Turks during the Greco-Turkish War. Both my family and relatives and my wife's father, brothers and sisters, with their spouses, attended the baptism reception. Mrs. Lee was still semi-paralyzed from her second stroke. After our guests had left, we went by to see Mrs. Lee so that she could see our daughter in her white baptismal dress. It was around this time that she had told my wife that she needed to make another baby quickly and aimed to get a boy before I realized that our daughter was a girl before abandoning both of them. Insecurity. After our daughter's baptism in Montreal, we had returned to Ottawa, where our daughter started receiving communion every Sunday that we had gone to church. Our daughter has since always liked going to church. It made her feel serene. On the other days of the week, our daughter was looked after by her mother while I was completing my university graduation requirement from the University of Ottawa with a paid internship. When I came home after work at about 5 p.m., I took over and cared for our daughter to give her mother a break. I also got up at night to change her diapers and keep my wife company while she breastfed our daughter, since she did not like being alone and awake at night. She also felt better on the weekends when I was home all day caring for our daughter and bringing her to the acupuncturist 3 kilometers or 2 miles east from our home on Richmond Road to help rid her of her back pain, which I gladly paid for since the sessions were not covered by either the public health insurance or her private health insurance from work. Despite my help, my wife found caring for our daughter stressful and unsatisfying. At first, she did not know the reason for her feelings and thought that she simply needed a break from her daily routine. She had told me that she would love to go to Las Vegas with her sister for a few days, but that she would take our daughter with her to avoid interrupting her breastfeeding. I gave her my blessing to go. She did not seem much better when she came back and had told me that she wanted to go back to work even though she was paid by her employer to stay home until December 2000. For Lien, staying home for another 2 months to look after our daughter felt like an eternity. She wanted me to quit my paid internship even though it was my last requirement for graduation, with only 8 more weeks remaining until my last day on December 8th. I was able to convince her to continue and had even hired a nanny from the agency that I used to work for to come and help look after our daughter for 3 hours a day. Monday to Friday. Again, I paid from my income from my internship. Although the nanny helped her greatly, Leanne was ecstatically happy to return to work on December 11, 2000, my 31st birthday and our daughter's 8-month anniversary. Even though I finished my internship, I was still invited to attend the office Christmas party with my wife and daughter. I ended up going alone with our daughter, since my wife told me that she could not go due to work commitments. Our daughter still had a fun time dressed as a miniature Santa Claus without the wig and fake beard, pulling the beard of the adult coworker dressed as Santa Claus, while she was sitting on his lap. My coworkers all adored her and wanted to take her home with them since she was an easygoing child. Leanne, our daughter, and I ended the year by celebrating Christmas in Montreal with family and New Year's Eve with our Greek community in Ottawa, a tradition that we kept every year for the next 7 years. In January 2001, Leanne continued to go to work during the day while I stayed home to care for our daughter, while also studying and doing assignments for my other university degree at Carleton. I was taking 4 courses and was in my last semester of the program. I was very organized and had established a daily routine on our daughter's schedule. I had intentionally registered for evening courses, which started at 7 p.m. every Monday to Thursday. I arrived home by 10:45 p.m. During this time, our daughter was looked after by her mother after she came home from work at 6:15. Every Monday to Thursday evening. We had kept this child care arrangement until May 2001. My father would phone me every few days to check on me and see how I was doing as a stay-at-home father. He told me that I was doing the best job and the most important job in the world. The way that he continued the conversation, I knew that in many ways, although he did not directly tell me, he regretted not having spent more time with our family when I was younger due to long hours of work and socializing. I knew that he did what he thought was best at the time, but I must admit that there were times when my mother, brother, and I did not appreciate his frugality and his miserliness. I will not get into details because if I did, then I would need another chapter to write for this book. Besides, those stories are best suited for a stand-up comedy routine on stage. At the time, my father's thriftiness was not funny, but looking back, you cannot help but laugh about it. Anyway, I consider myself fortunate that in today's world it is easier for men of my generation to be an involved father in child rearing and allow mothers to live their lives outside the home. There was only one time that I recall when my wife had taken a few days off from work during February 2001, and that was when her younger sister had unexpectedly come to our home from Montreal with her two sons to seek refuge from her husband. They had gotten into an argument over missing money that was unaccounted for and allegations of his sexual infidelity. Unable to resolve the matter, my sister-in-law waited for her husband to go to work, then got onto an intercity bus with their two sons and came to Ottawa without telling the boy's father that she was leaving. The boy's father panicked when he returned home from the office and started calling everyone he knew, including me. I was told by my wife to lie to him and tell him that I had not seen his wife and children. I did not want or like to do this to the man, but I felt compelled to. I also did not like the conversation that I was overhearing between my wife and her sister. Leanne was congratulating her younger sister for leaving her husband with their sons without telling him where she was taking them. She told her that she should have only taken the youngest son and left the oldest one at home, just like the way their mother used to do with their father when they were little girls. According to my wife, it was the best way to punish the husband and extort money from him. Although my wife admitted that she did not like being separated from their father when their mother was engaged in war with him, she told her sister that now she understands why their mother did it and that in the end it was justifiable. Her sister had doubts about the justification of my wife's advice. She also felt that as a stay-at-home mother, she had very little power in her marriage and that maybe it was time to return home. My wife tried to convince her otherwise. She told her younger sister that she was living in Quebec, the best province in the best country a woman can possibly live in, and that she had nothing to worry about because society, the courts, the police, and the government, even the men working in these occupations, will be unconditionally on her side and do what she asks them to do. I did not agree with my wife's advice and had waited for her to go to the bathroom to shower before I politely encouraged my sister-in-law that she should return to her husband and find another way to resolve their issues. She agreed with me, and I drove her and her sons downtown to the Ottawa Central Station bus terminal on Catherine Street to board the intercity bus back to Montreal. In April 2001, we were invited to celebrate Orthodox Easter in New York City with my cousins at my cousin Margie's home in Astoria, Queens. My wife did not want to go, even though she had Good Friday and the Monday after Easter off work. She chose instead to get some dental work done on the Thursday before the Easter long weekend and relax at home in Ottawa. She gave me permission to take our daughter with me and travel down to New York with my brother. My family was a bit surprised that she not only did not want to attend our family reunion, but that she allowed me to take our daughter without her. Still, my cousin Margie, who was 7 months pregnant with her first child, a boy that she was going to name after her father Christos, and her husband, her third one, originally from Pakistan, Margie's sister Betty, along with her Sicilian husband Angelo and their two daughters, my cousin Demetrios and his British fiancée, and my cousin Christos and his Polish wife, all celebrated Easter together. After we had returned to Ottawa, we had all gone the following weekend to celebrate our daughter's first birthday at my sister-in-law's house in Montreal. Both sides of our daughter's family were present. The following week, my mother-in-law was diagnosed with colon cancer, but Mrs. Lee refused to have more diagnostic tests done. She said that she was scared. When her condition worsened, she was hospitalized at the Notre Dame Hospital on Sherbrooke Street near her home. Her doctors managed to get more tests done, and it did not look good. They strongly recommended surgery, but she refused. She remained hospitalized. My wife did not want us to keep our plans of going to Greece in mid-May, but her mother insisted that she go and live her life with her husband and daughter. With her mother's blessing, we left for Greece the day after my last class at Carleton University. We had flown with Greece's national airline, Olympic Airways. The Greek stewardesses on the plane treated Leanne like a queen and gave her preferential treatment, not only because she had our 13-month-old daughter with her, but because she was considered a Greek, even though she was not born in Greece, nor was she born to Greek parents or grandparents. The stewardesses always gave special treatment to people of Greek descent and extended that treatment to their non-Greek spouses. When the Greek government announced on March 6, 2009, that they had sold the rights to operate the country's national carrier, it broke my heart because there has not been a single private company that has been able to maintain the high standards of service provided by Olympic Airways, whose last flight was on December 31, 2009. Tragedy. The main purpose of our trip to Greece in 2001 was to introduce my wife and our daughter to my aunts, uncles, and cousins. They were all impressed by my daughter's pig noises. Oink! I had also used the opportunity to show my wife around Greece since this was her first time there. In addition to Athens and Amarinthos, where we had family, all three of us had gone, using the money that my father given to us as a gift, to the island of Mykonos, Paros, Antiparos, Naxos, and Syros. That is, the group of islands southeast of mainland Greece referred to as the Cyclades. It was on the island of Naxos that our daughter had finally learned how to walk upright. Most of our time was spent relaxing on the beaches, eating in taverns and restaurants, shopping, sightseeing, and, for my wife, gambling on the island of Syros. My cousins and I had taken my wife to see the Trella Nera, or crazy waters, on the Strait of Euripus in the city of Halkida, about 29 kilometers or 18 miles west of my father's hometown of Amarinthos, where the ocean waters under the bridge flows in one direction for 6 hours, then remains stable for 8 minutes, then begins to flow again in the opposite direction for 6 hours, followed by another 8 minutes of stillness before flowing again in the opposite direction. Continuity. Throughout our Greek vacation, I made certain that we called my brother-in-law every few days to learn how my mother-in-law was doing. For the first 3 weeks, everything was stable. On our last week in Greece, things had turned for the worse. For whatever reason, my mother-in-law had undergone surgery, which went well, but she had gone into a coma. We returned to Ottawa later that week. We had planned our return for June 17th so that I could start my first day at work at Health Canada on the 19th, on a direct flight on Olympic Airways from Athens to Montreal. When we arrived in Montreal, Mrs. Lee's health condition had not changed. She was still in a coma. We had learned that a couple of weeks before her coma, Mr. Lee had convinced Mrs. Lee to proceed with the surgery. It was a decision that Mr. Lee regretted. My wife, her brothers, and her sisters were worried, not only about losing their mother, but also their father, who was falling deeper and deeper into depression. During this time, my wife and I had to both work in Ottawa. My mother was staying with us in our apartment to help look after our daughter during the day with the nanny that we had hired. The daycare at Tunney's pasture, 1 kilometer or 0.6 miles away from my wife's office, could only accommodate our daughter as of July 2nd. Part 16. The second half of June and the entire month of July were particularly stressful and difficult for the Lee family. Nevertheless, the wedding of Mr. Lee's oldest grandson, the son of Mr. Lee's firstborn child, and her physician husband, was still proceeding as scheduled due to the number of guests that were attending from several different countries. Travel arrangements that were made and paid for 6 months beforehand. Even though my wife and I had to work in Ottawa every week, we drove to Montreal every Friday evening to be with Mr. and Mrs. Lee until something happened to Leanne on the week of July 24th. She suddenly got off of the couch, went out the door, and left home, leaving me and our daughter behind. I still remember our daughter chasing after her, but Leanne had shut the door in her face and left. Our daughter was upset and began crying as she banged on the door to our apartment. By the time I opened the door, she was gone. She left with the clothes she was wearing. She never answered her cell phone when I called and did not show up for work. This continued for days. I ran into her with our daughter at the Carlingwood shopping mall, but she was not ready to come home. On the Saturday morning of her nephew's wedding, she arrived unannounced at our home and told me to get myself and our daughter ready so that we may attend her nephew's wedding in Montreal. She still wanted to give her family the impression that everything was normal between us. After her nephew's wedding, we spoke in great lengths on the drive back home like we always did. She admitted that she had become very depressed about 6 months after giving birth to our daughter, and she felt lost. She asked if I would welcome her back home. I told her I would, but that we had to seek help with her postpartum depression and also use this time to see a marriage counselor as well. She agreed. The following Tuesday, her brother-in-law called her at the office and told her that her mother had died. She left immediately from work to go to Montreal to attend to her father, whom she was worried would kill himself because he blamed himself for convincing Mrs. Lee to have the surgery. I took care of our daughter alone for the next few days until I was able to leave Ottawa for Montreal on Friday afternoon. The wake was held at a funeral parlor. It had already started days before I arrived on the Friday afternoon, and it continued into the next day. They maintained the Vietnamese Buddhist traditions at the wake, which can last anywhere from 3 to 5 days. Everyone came to visit, pay their respects, and offer their sad condolences on Friday and Saturday. They would bow in front of my mother-in-law's picture. I remember the monks coming several times throughout the day to pray. Family members also kneeled, bowed, and prayed with everyone wearing headbands and white robes and pants, including my sister-in-law from California, who was there with her husband and 2 daughters. I had just learned that her husband was dying of terminal lung cancer due to secondhand smoke. Her husband never smoked, but was often around his brothers who were heavy smokers. She had expressed regret that she did not spend enough time as a wife and mother, because she had made her business a priority and let her husband raise their daughters, and was now trying to make up for lost time by always being around them. On the following Sunday, my mother-in-law's coffin was brought to crematorium, where more prayers were made by the monks before she was cremated. My mother had come to pay her respects and share her sorrow. Unfortunately, my father had already arrived in Athens when my mother-in-law had died. He was forced to offer his condolences by telephone from Greece. In the Greek custom, cremation is never allowed, nor are funerals ever scheduled on a Sunday. Usually, a wake or viewing is held about 48 hours after the person's death. Often the night before the funeral, although I have seen instances where they delayed it by a week to allow family overseas to attend the service. As is customary in many other Christian denominations, family members of the deceased wear black clothing. There is a short ceremony of about 30 to 60 minutes led by the priest. When the priest concludes the service, after hymns and prayers, mourners are permitted to view the body. The body is usually viewed in an open casket during the funeral services in church. Greek Orthodox followers traditionally bow before the coffin and kiss the icon or cross-placed either on the chest of the deceased or on or near the deceased's forehead. Some mourners leave flowers. A loved one may deliver a eulogy. The priest then anoints the body with oil and dust while reciting verses from the Bible. After the funeral, the priest and mourners gather at the cemetery where the body is prepared for funeral. Following the hymns, the priest bestows final blessings during the lowering of the coffin into the ground. Mourners often toss flowers and soil into the grave, which always faces east. After the burial, mourners will gather for a luncheon called the macaria, in which fish is served. Memorial services may be held on the 3rd, 9th, and 40th day after the death. A memorial service is also held on the 1-year anniversary of the death, which is comparable to the Vietnamese tradition. The death of my mother-in-law in August, followed by the terrorist attacks in New York City and Washington, D.C. on September 11, delayed Leanne from getting the appropriate help she needed to deal with her mental health issues. Although she was working for the Department of National Defense, she was mandated to provide direct hands-on military response to any terrorist attacks, if any, in Ottawa. She was, however, expected to provide information technology and communication support not only for military personnel in Ottawa, but for those across Canada. The threat and risk of a terrorist attack on Ottawa was quite possible given the city's proximity to New York City and the pattern of attacks in the United States. That is, the American capital and America's largest city. Many Canadians believed that Ottawa and either Toronto or Montreal were next on the terrorist list. Many people in Ottawa were anxious and scared, particularly those working in high buildings. Shortly after the Twin Towers were hit by the planes, I remember receiving a phone call from my daughter's daycare, which was located in the ground floor of the tall Statistics Canada government building, to come and pick her up because the daycare workers were too scared to stay in the building. On the way to pick our daughter up to bring her home, I ran into Leanne at the Tunney's Pasture bus stop. She was returning from her day course downtown in the Place Bell Tower on Elgin Street. She had told me that because of what was happening in New York and Washington, D.C., she was called in by her supervisor to report to the office immediately. I completely understood that as an employee of National Defense, even a civilian one, she had a duty to provide support to her military colleagues at a time of great danger and uncertainty to Canada and its people. I remember that at the time I felt proud of her. It was only 7.5 years later that I discovered the truth about what she really did on the day of 9/11. The September 11 terrorist attacks directly affected my family. My cousin's wife was working on Wall Street that morning, as was my mother's cousin, who was working near the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. My father was on a flight back home from Athens on that day, but his plane had to return to Greece, where he got stranded for a week. Chaos. Due to the chaos and confusion, Leanne never went to see a psychiatrist for her postpartum depression, which was further compounded by the death of her mother and the effects that this had on her father, and settled for a quick-fix solution by obtaining a prescription for an antidepressant, Zoloft, from her family physician. I never agreed with this approach to addressing the underlying issues behind her depression, particularly when her depression had persisted for 16 months without proper management. Even our marriage counselor, Dr. Nancy Smith, whom we started seeing in September 2001, questioned the appropriateness and effectiveness of this approach to managing Leanne's depression. She felt that a psychiatrist should have been involved. Unsurprisingly, my wife and her family physician, Dr. Brine, did not think so. Dr. Smith had evaluated us individually, and together as a couple, I had explained my concerns and grievances about my wife's behavior and actions during our marriage, which were exacerbated since the birth of our daughter the previous year. My wife attempted to justify her actions by stating that I was putting too much time into parenting and working to pay our living expenses and not enough time on her. She stated that she did not see any point to me working because I was not spending my money responsibly and that the money from my income always ran out at the end of the month. She presented the issue to my mother and tried to prove her case with her by showing our monthly bank account statements. Upon renewing the financial transactions, my mother concluded that none of my income was frivolously spent and that every dollar was accounted for, that is, the money was spent on living expenses like the rent, daycare, telephone bills, cable bills, etc. My wife had considered my mother's response as a betrayal of their female alliance and started criticizing her intervening in our marriage. Consequently, my wife stopped speaking to her or visiting her and her relatives. My wife had told Dr. Smith that she liked it better when I was not working, even though it meant that we would be poorer. Dr. Smith saw my wife's response as an indication that she loved to be in control of the marriage and that she saw my income and salary, even when it was less than hers, as a threat since it made me less dependent upon her. My wife had repeatedly told Dr. Smith that I no longer obeyed her. When Dr. Smith raised the issue of trust, Leanne replied that if I ever defied her or betrayed her, she would cut my penis off with a pair of scissors. Dr. Smith did not take her seriously and thought that she was joking. The problem with Leanne was you could never tell when she was joking or not. As our weekly sessions continued over the course of 3 months, usually during our lunch break from work, it became obvious to Dr. Smith that the source of the problems in our marriage was coming from Leanne, and more precisely, her unreasonably high expectations of marriage. When this was expressed to my wife, she was not happy. In fact, she had stood me and Dr. Smith up the following week. It was early February 2002. At the last minute, while I was waiting for my wife in the waiting room, she had called me on my cell phone to tell me that she was not coming and that she did not see the point of continuing the counseling sessions with Dr. Smith. She gave me her blessing to continue on my own if I wanted to. When I had relayed the message to Dr. Smith in her office that day, Dr. Smith was not happy. Actually, this was the first time that I saw any expressions of frustrations on her face. She had blurted out, "When is Leanne going to start taking her responsibilities as a wife and a mother seriously?" When I asked her, "What should I do now?" she replied that if she allowed outside forces to influence her and interfere with our marriage, the marriage would not get better, and that the next move that I made was entirely up to me, but whatever I decided, I always needed to consider the best interests of our daughter. That was the last advice that she had given to me, since she did not see the point of continuing our session without my wife. My day-to-day life with my wife and daughter continued as best we could. We both continued to work. Our daughter continued attending daycare at Tunney's pasture, whom I brought every morning and picked up every afternoon since Leanne gradually stopped doing it, and visited family in Montreal on most weekends. But when it involved my mother, it was only our daughter and I who visited. For the first time in my career as a federal public servant, I was required to travel on business. Leanne was very nervous about having me leave for the island of Victoria in British Columbia, about 4,372 kilometers, or 2,717 miles west of Ottawa, and leave her behind to care for our daughter alone for 5 consecutive days. So I brought them with me at my expense. While I was working, she was visiting her Chinese girlfriend and former co-worker from Ottawa, whom I had met, both when she was living in Ottawa and again in Victoria. This was the first time that we had traveled together as a family on my business trip, because Leanne did not want to look after our daughter alone, but it became evident in the years to come that it would not be the last.